John Fisher and the Oakland Athletics want to build a ballpark condo hotel complex on the 50-acre Howard Terminal site in Oakland Seaport. And they want to develop the land in East Oakland, where the Oakland Coliseum is located, into a condo commercial development. They have released a draft environmental impact report on the Howard Terminal site that will pave the way to getting approvals from the Oakland City Council, Port Commission, Bay Area Conservation District, and other public agencies to start building on Howard Terminal. However, the issue of whether a ballpark residential development is compatible in a heavy industrialized seaport and its operational and economic impact on the port is not under consideration.
The issue of whether or not this is a good place for a stadium, whether or not it's compatible with the continued operation of a successful and growing seaport, and the overall question for the Oakland community about what they want in terms of an industrial base, and how their downtown and Jack London Square and West Oakland are going to sit in relation to their industrial base, are all really big, important questions that need to be answered.
That's happened. We had a state bill that had text in it that said the Oakland City has decided to do ... There was a flat out lie in the text of a state bill. We had a press conference that was done by the aides saying the decision has been made. And so, now we have this flyer here that again says, to be built, not to be decided. And so it really does start to feel like the people are not taking seriously the fact that we haven't voted. It's not authorized until we vote. We haven't even been given a proposal to vote on yet. And it's completely inappropriate, whether it's a press release from the A's, a piece of legislation from a state legislator, a promotional document from city staff. Nothing should be being put out that in any way suggests that a decision has been made. We need to be hearing on all of the issues about the traffic and the jobs and the port before we make a decision. And I'm starting to feel like it's an attempt to jam us to make a decision. And yes, when we asked the state officials why they listed Oakland as having endorsed something that not only had the council not voted to endorse, but had never been presented to us to endorse, they did tell us that it was because the mayor said so. So we really need to not have this type of conduct go on with the project that needs analysis, that needs decision-making, that is thoughtful, and that is not prejudged or even giving people the impression that it's being prejudged, because all of the issues that were raised tonight are ones that would need to be considered before we would make a decision.
And they shouldn't be piecemealed on a project by project basis. And they shouldn't be brought forward only because there's a baseball team that wants to build a stadium here. These are long-term planning issues that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed consistently, and they have regional impacts. Everyone in the Bay Area benefits with the working port in Oakland. If you reduce your industrial footprint, and if you reduce your ability to use the Oakland waterfront for transiting goods from overseas into the Bay Area, consumer demand isn't going to go down. The use of products from overseas isn't going to go down. How are consumers going to get their goods from overseas, or how are Californians going to access export markets? So the current site is not just a parking lot. It's an actual terminal, which means we are moving cargo containers, we're moving trucks, we're moving chassis, we're staging them. And it's a living, breathing part of the port. We have over 300,000 gate moves in and out of that terminal every single year. The DEIR doesn't say that it's vacant, but it calls it a parking lot.
The Port of Oakland is the third largest port on the West Coast. It's a key economic engine for Northern California. We need to preserve this place because it is, without the free flow of goods, our economy will be severely impacted. Good jobs, high-paying jobs, union jobs will be impacted. The free flow of transportation on our trucking lanes, the railroad, our turning circle here must be preserved. We have to keep it intact. And a ballpark here with residential condos and a giant hotel, there is no parking. There is no way to get in and out and still continue to operate. There are things called public nuisance laws. As soon as there's residents here, this noise, pollution, and dust and smoke that comes from the port will become an issue for these new residents, and it's sort of genie let out the bottle. Once that genie's let out, there's no stopping it. We will not be able to continue to function in an efficient manner, and that will impact our business and take jobs out of Oakland and Northern California.
I mean, the impact to the Port of Oakland, to the Seaport of Oakland, will be major. The Port of Oakland is currently the third busiest port on the West Coast. It is representative of heavy industry. And we think that when you place multi-million-dollar housing units adjacent to that kind of industry, you subject the industry to a myriad of complaints from neighbors. And so when we risk what is called deindustrialization, then the impact is immeasurable. Currently, there are about 28,000 jobs that are generated from the Seaport. I'm not talking about the airport operations or the commercial side operations, but I'm talking about the Seaport. And so all of those jobs will be at risk. 28,000 jobs represents 28,000 families, and that's a huge problem.
We directly hire and employ about 12,000 people. It's a very diverse group of folks that are direct hires. But from our members, we are primarily union employers, employ a direct set of highly skilled longshoremen, and they comprise one of the highest paid blue-collar unionized workforces in North America. Those jobs are highly sought after. We have a lot of competition for those positions. There's a lot of other direct jobs though that are impacted at the port, and that is everything from truck drivers to warehousemen, transloaders, freight forwarders, everyone who's touching the cargo, moving a container. That's that total composition of approximately 12,000 different individuals. And then obviously there are a lot of induced and indirect jobs that are associated with all of those different economic activities, and those comprise about another 15,000 or so jobs throughout Northern California. It makes this really the premier and regional hub for economic development with respect to logistics in all of Northern California. That doesn't include all of the jobs associated with the actual cargo that we're moving. That's a very wide spectrum of economic activities. And in that regard, the Port of Oakland is basically facilitating about 500,000 jobs throughout California and reaching throughout the country. That is really the hallmark of the significance of the port. It's not just that you create local jobs and economic development impacts for your community, but you're really facilitating economic improvements and development across the entire country. The access to and from the Port of Oakland and to and from the terminal, how the access issues will impede our traffic flow, create congestion, and ultimately potentially impact our competitiveness. The most obvious issue with Howard Terminal is access to the terminal itself. It sits directly on a Union Pacific rail line that also is the main line for the Capitol Corridor. And there's that if you want to have direct access to that site, you need to build vehicular grade separations. Those grade separations do not exist. When you have a railroad crossing at grade, then that means that the rail and the road are crossing on the exact same level. You have to wait for the train, the yard arms come down, block cars, and the challenge with that is that it creates a lot of risk for pedestrians and automobiles, but also for the railroad. You have fatalities, you have the unfortunate situation where accidents occur, and those are preventable if you grade separate it. The project itself right now contemplates having a bike and pedestrian overcrossing, but it doesn't contemplate any such overcrossings for vehicles. And with the amount of volume of traffic that we're talking about here, that's a real problem for the site. But if you want to maintain consistent access to that site, those need to be built. There are two main access roads to Howard Terminal, and in our conversations with the Union Pacific Railroad, they have made it very clear to the aides, to the port, and to the city that they need to have those vehicular grade separations in place if you're going to be building a stadium and 3,000 units of housing and put a hotel on the other side. So there's only one side which is land side, and that side is directly constricted by those railroad tracks. As far as we know, there's no plans for any type of accommodation for mass transit other than the potential for the A's gondola or some additional bus service.
And let's stop saying there will be a BART station. BART has already said no, rather strongly.
But in the supply chain, an extra 75 minutes on your trip back and forth between the Port of Oakland and an ag exporter in the Central Valley, over time, that eats away at your ability to move a certain number of containers. You might have to pay more for your trucking. Over time, that might mean that you're doing less trucking, and that would mean that you're moving less containers. Or you aren't, if you're the trucking company, you might not be able to get as many moves in a day. You might have to hire more people to do the same amount of work. Those costs add up, and over time they make you less competitive, and they will have very real economic costs.
The future of Oakland, the economic engine of Northern California, the jewel of the Bay Area, is the Port of Oakland, supporting thousands and thousands of jobs that are good paying jobs. The Toyota Group did a study of slow growth, moderate growth, and strong growth at the Port of Oakland over the next 40 years. Even under the slow growth scenario, we are out of space come 2050. Under the moderate or strong growth scenarios, we are running out of space on waterfront property for maritime purposes as soon as 2030. In just 10 years, we're going to be out of space on the waterfront under a very moderate or strong growth scenario. This is extremely concerning. I want to bring to your attention right now that there is a memo going throughout the industry advising vessel lines and terminal operators to get ready to start making plans to bypass Oakland if there's a stadium built. And we want you to do everything you can to protect this port.
You have here is the turning basin. It's another key aspect of the working port. Behind me is the over 70% of the cargo that's moved through the port, and it relies on this turning basin for the ships to come in and out. This turning basin must stay viable for the future of the port. The larger ships that are going to come here need to have a upgraded turning basin. It needs to be kept constantly dredged and enlarged to allow for these ships to be able to come in.
So the larger your ships get in a constrained turning basin, the less flexibility you have to have that ship come in and do business here. It has a very small margin of error. It requires a lot of skill to turn that ship. So as you get bigger and you get to that place where the turning basin is constrained, you need to bring more assets. You need additional tugs. You need a second pilot. Those pilots bring on additional computing resources, so they have additional displays in the bridge of the ship, so they have additional GPS controls. They have specific restrictions placed on them by the Coast Guard on time of day, swell, the ebb or flow of the tide, and wind. The good news is the average size vessel is not taxing the turning basin right now. So we can accommodate a lot of vessels during daylight hours that are large. But that will not be the case forever as average ships sizes continue to increase, as more of the largest ships cascade back into the Pacific out of the Atlantic trade, as they inevitably will. So we know we're going to have additional stressors on the turning basin. We know we're going to have to expand it in order to accommodate future generations of ships. You know, this will be an evaluation of how you can expand the turning basin, what makes sense, and working with the pilots and with the wharfingers at the Port of Oakland and the Corps of Engineers to make accommodations about what that looks like. The preliminary understanding is that it will take at least 10 acres off the southwest corner of Howard Terminal to accommodate one of the potential designs for that turning basin.
You know, the Howard Terminal site is it's only 50 acres, and it's in a choke point of trucking lanes, railroad, and shipping. We need this area. It turns around 100,000 containers a year. This site versus the Coliseum, which has already had its environmental review. It has stadium on it already. It's ready to go tomorrow. You could build tomorrow. It's 3 times as large. You could have 3 times the housing, 3 times the hotel, and 3 times the stadium. It's next to all major transportation, like BART. It's less than a quarter mile away from the Coliseum. Here, the nearest BART station's a mile away. And there's no way for public to walk here currently with the current infrastructure. There, you're right next to the freeway, you're right next to the airport, you're right next to Amtrak. The roads were widened in the 60s just for game day traffic. It's the ideal location for a stadium and development for Oakland. Yet, this land grab by the Fisher family is designed to maximize the amount of land that they can get in Oakland. They want to build here, they want to build condos, it'll run the businesses out, and as the businesses leave, the land will be vacant. Well, hey, let's build some more development. If we let this happen, it's a domino effect. The dominoes will fall on the port. The port will be run out again. Currently, there's no proposal that I've seen that shows any kind of overpasses, easements, or parking that would allow for Oakland A's game day traffic, residential traffic, and hotel visitors to get in and out of this area without impeding the port traffic. Our overweight trucking lanes run right adjacent to Howard Terminal. The railroad runs right adjacent to Howard Terminal. And if you can't have these key transportation routes in and out of the port, including our one overpass, the out-of-line overpass down the street, if you can't have this, then you're not going to have optimal conditions for business. And this business is all about running at the highest rate possible, getting your goods in and out as fast as possible. If our productivity is hindered in any way, the shippers are going to look elsewhere to ship their goods in and out of here.
My name is Brother Derek Muhammad, West Oakland resident and member of Local 10. By definition, gentrification is the process of neighborhood change that includes economic change in a historically disinvested neighborhood by means of developing real estate that conforms to the standards of more affluent people. New higher income residents moving in, as well as demographic change, not only in terms of income level, but also in terms of changes in the education level and racial makeup of the residents. So when more affluent people move in, the value of a thing, the price of a thing increases, making it more unaffordable for the people who are already there to remain. And that's what West Oakland and now East Oakland is being confronted with. I want to say that the black community, brothers and sisters, is under siege. And we're under siege by forces that would like to drive us out. And I believe that these forces are emanating from City Hall, from real estate development corporations, and from the police department, who will work in tandem to drive black people out of Oakland, California. That's something we got to deal with. Now, this project that's being proposed for Howard Terminal represents the uprooting of the black community of West Oakland through that process called gentrification. Ask yourself, why are they building a light rail down East 14th Street? Did any of you ask for that? And what will happen to the businesses once that light rail is in? The same thing that happened to 7th Street when they built the post office and the BART down there. A pushing out of the residents who are already there. Now, I also oppose this project because the project has the great potential to initiate the deindustrialization of a key urban center. Beginning in the 1970s and in the 1980s, we saw the deindustrialization of urban centers like Detroit, which, by the way, was one of the richest cities, not just in America, but in the whole world. Look at it now. We saw the deindustrialization of Pittsburgh, of Chicago, of Philadelphia, South Los Angeles, and even Oakland, California. We saw the decimation of manufacturing, warehouse jobs, factory jobs, and subsequent to that, beginning in 1984, 1985, 1986, we saw the introduction of crack cocaine in these urban centers. And that produced an economy predicated on drugs, whereby the drug business became the primary means of employment, replacing an economy based on industry. We suffered from that. Black families were annihilated from that. And if you don't have a family, you don't have a community. And so we can't go back to that, brothers and sisters. And with the help of God, we ain't going back to that. And so it's time to close ranks. It's time to start pushing back, because our future depends on it.
I mean, the impact to the Port of Oakland, to the Seaport of Oakland, will be major. The Port of Oakland is currently the third busiest port on the West Coast. It is representative of heavy industry. And we think that when you place multi-million-dollar housing units adjacent to that kind of industry, you subject the industry to a myriad of complaints from neighbors. And so when we risk what is called deindustrialization, then the impact is immeasurable. Currently, there are about 28,000 jobs that are generated from the Seaport. And so all of those jobs will be at risk. 28,000 jobs represents 28,000 families, and that's a huge problem. People need a job, and I get that. And what's being promoted is 6,000 jobs. But the reality is the construction jobs, the couple of thousand construction jobs, are going to go to the individuals who are already members of the trade organizations. The trade organizations in this area do not have a history of recruiting in the black neighborhoods of West Oakland or East Oakland. So the question is, how will you get a temporary construction job on a union project if you're not a member of the union? So that's question number one, and that's something for the people who are talking about jobs for the community to consider. You're not going to get a job unless you're in the union, and the union doesn't recruit in the ghetto, all right? Number two, service jobs, janitorial jobs, vendor jobs. Those jobs have already been promised to the current workforce, okay? So the workforce that is at the East Oakland location have been already guaranteed their job at the new location. So how many jobs did that leave for the community of West Oakland? It's another question for you to consider. So too many games are being played, and the historically marginalized, oppressed, rejected, dejected black community is being enticed to support this project because they're being told that they're going to get jobs. And that is a misleading of the people here. And so these are things that we are raising, and we want to continue to push this and continue to wake the people up.
You know, in the context of what this project means for the future of the Port of Oakland and whether or not it will grow, this is a real soul-searching moment for the port. They need to decide, am I going to be creating the circumstances in which I can grow over the next 2 or 3 decades or not? It's not enough to say that you're preserving the amount of cargo that we have now. We've already invested for the next 10 years. That doesn't count for the fact that the Port of Oakland is sitting on $1 billion of existing revenue bond debt for the infrastructure that we already have. So if you're putting in this project and you're not doing it in the context of what is the port that I want to have 20 years from now, you're choking growth at the port. And if you're choking growth at the port now, there is no way. The amount of money that we're going to need to reinvest in the equipment of tomorrow is going to be staggering. What do I want to do here? Do I want to have the capacity for growth built into my system, or do I want to cap my ability to grow? And once you cap your ability to grow, you're not going to be investing in the Port of Oakland much longer.
They're real estate developers. I mean, that's the bottom line. They're real estate developers first, and a baseball franchise second. They want to make money. That's what this whole thing is about. It's not about winning championships. It's not about playing baseball. It's about developing land, making money at the expense of everybody else.
There's a lot of irony in this proposal. It takes an
asset that any city and municipality would really die to have, which is driving a middle class and blue collar labor force that creates massive amounts of wealth across an entire region. And it's choosing to put that at risk for concentrated wealth in the hands of a few that creates a whole bunch of self-serving service level jobs to support it in the restaurant industry. You're taking skilled jobs that are among the highest paid blue collar unionized workforce jobs in North America. And Port of Oakland is a economic asset that doesn't do that. It doesn't concentrate wealth at the top or the bottom. It's very democratic in the way that it works. It spreads wealth throughout the region, and it takes people from all different sorts of life, from unskilled labor to skilled labor to very, very highly specialized corporate roles. They're all there. It's a very integrated network of the supply chain, and it requires a fair amount of public investment, but again, it pays back in $280 million a year in state and local taxes, plus billions of dollars in income for a whole host of different jobs. But to sacrifice that for a project like this, that again concentrates wealth and creates a whole host of just very basic service level jobs. As important as those jobs might be, it doesn't create the same level of overall economic value for the region.
Let me just run this down real quick to you. The A's explored the possibility of moving to San Jose. Major League Baseball said no. They explored moving to Fremont. Baseball said no. Then they wanted to go to Chinatown near Laney College. That was stopped by the community of Chinatown and also Peralta School District. The former owner of the Oakland A's, Lou Wolf, when this proposal of moving to the Port of Oakland, you know what Lou Wolf said? It's not a viable idea. It's not a viable idea. I'm not making this up. It's not viable. And he was right. This is a land grab. First of all, let me tell you where things are at. The Oakland A's and the city of Oakland leadership haven't heard from us. That's where things are at. This is far from a done deal. Nothing has been approved. You have to understand that big money controls the narrative on the news. The A's want you to think that this train cannot be stopped. We can stop it, and it starts here. Everyone should sign those petitions. We need to have a town hall meeting where the Oakland A's can answer questions and stop playing games. We also need to have the city council to answer questions. This is our tax dollars we're talking.
The short answer to the question of what's required to be in an EIR is that everything's significant with respect to all the different categories of evaluation is supposed to be included in an EIR. Things that are truly speculative or not likely to happen or legally impossible, those don't have to be included in an EIR. But if it's an outcome that is potentially significant in any of the areas of the EIR, so that could be in water quality or air quality or transportation or noise, there needs to be an evaluation of those impacts. And then you are required to give policymakers choices about potential mitigation of those impacts, or to tell the public, if you're going to move forward with a project that has significant impacts, that you're not going to mitigate, or that you're not going to actually choose an alternative which is preferred from an environmental point of view. The EIR itself doesn't require outcomes, but it requires analysis. So the fact that there are likely outcomes that are not analyzed fully, not fully mitigated and not fully described in this document, despite its length and despite all the complexity associated with a lot of the analysis in that document. I think if you describe something as a parking lot, the public is going to presume that that type of activity can just happen anywhere. And that the only thing that we're really talking about here is finding a place to leave a piece of equipment, here would be a truck, idle. Well, that's not what's occurring at Howard Terminal. It is still a terminal. The only part of the operation that is really substantially different from other types of intermodal yards is that we aren't using those ship-to-shore container cranes, and we are not using it as a cross-dock facility to take cargo from a vessel onto a truck, or vice versa, from a truck onto a vessel. But the trucks that are still coming and staging there are doing intermodal business. And that's important because that type of activity is occurring in close proximity to the port and to our industrial operations, but it isn't happening in the community. We are in the process of consolidating support activities away from West Oakland. In West Oakland, it is an environmental justice community that has outsized impacts on residents there. We have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the Port of Oakland to reduce our emissions footprint. And we're controlling not just for greenhouse gases or pollutants that cause smog, but we're controlling for diesel particulate matter, which is really the most important control measure from a public health perspective when industrial activities are located close to where people live. And it's been identified as a toxic air contaminant. And so it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we reduce exposure to people from our activities. And the best and easiest way to do it, and actually the most cost-effective way, is to separate out people and residential activities from industrial activities. The physical separation creates the best measure of protection for people. So the irony of all this is that by not recognizing the value of Howard Terminal as a place where we've consolidated industrial activity, the A's in the city are now contemplating and proposing putting housing directly on our industrial facility. It's the exact opposite of what Howard Terminal represents right now, which is the separation of those two activities. We're consolidating trucking, support, and intermodal yard facilities at Howard Terminal precisely to remove industrial activity away from people. And now what this does is it proposes to put people right back in the middle of the mix of impacted industrial land. So one of the largest components of the project should be a focus on how to make sure that not only are rail impacts to the project kept to a minimum, but how are the project impacts on rail kept to a minimum. So as you may recall, the Howard Terminal site is surrounded on 3 sides by water, and on one side by mainline rail of the Union Pacific Railroad. On a per intersection basis, that's really what we're concerned about, because we only have so many different ways to access the port, and those can be choke points. So if we're not keeping traffic moving through the intersections at our choke points, we know we will be negatively impacted. And that's the thing that hasn't been analyzed. Since the draft DEIR has been released, we've really immediately focused on transportation issues as core to our concerns about keeping the port moving and keeping the industrial area of Oakland productive. And one of the main areas of concern is the lack of analysis of impacts on trucking, truck movements, and the like. As you can imagine, the displacement of the thousands of transactions at Howard Terminal are a concern. Those need to go somewhere. And the EIR really just doesn't address those at all. It writes off the potential changes as speculative and then doesn't analyze them. And that's a problem because there obviously will be impacts from the displacement of hundreds of thousands of truck moves. They're important to us as a business community. They're obviously important to our customers in terms of their access to the port, but they're also important to the city of Oakland and its residents with respect to pollution, congestion, safety. Those questions need to be analyzed. So when you're looking at the basis for those types of analysis in an environmental impact report, there are really two main things that you need to do. One of them is you need to establish a project baseline. You need to essentially do that by describing what activity occurs there now, and then you need to describe the impacts to that baseline. You need to be able to describe how the project that's being proposed is going to change the current condition. And all that is very logical with respect to environmental review, because you have to isolate for policymakers the trade-offs that they're making, how their decisions are going to impact the community, and inform the public about those things. That requires analysis. And the CIR just doesn't do that analysis. It calls those changes as inducing a speculative future condition. And because it's speculative, it just doesn't analyze it. Well, everything in an EIR that's prospective is speculative. The real question is, have you addressed the speculative nature of things by doing analysis? And at this point, it just says, we don't know, therefore we don't have to analyze it. Well, of course you have to analyze it. That's what you do when you don't know things. You ask questions and you seek out answers. And that's the whole point of the EIR process. Typically what you would do to analyze transportation impacts, you would use a couple of different measures. You would use level of service to tell the community and policymakers what congestion is going to look like when you've added a new project. And also you use vehicle miles traveled for transportation projects. And that's the way that EIRs are now set up to analyze transportation across the board using VMT.
So vehicle miles traveled, VMT, is now the standard under California law for how to analyze significant impacts on transportation. It's essentially a proxy for congestion and also for emissions. It's somewhat controversial when they made that change, but they made the change and it is the rules, and so that's what we go by. In the past was that transportation impacts were actually measured by another standard, and that standard was level of service. It's called LOS. And that's when you knew your transportation infrastructure was potentially overwhelmed by the impacts of a project. One of the traditional LOS measures of significance was an intersection's ability to move traffic at a specific rate, and then they'd give it a grade. So if your intersection worked properly and moved traffic freely, you were given an LOS of A. If it failed and it was in perpetual gridlock, you were given a grade of F, and there were obviously gradients in between. This does not do that. VMT is actually an especially bad analytical format for the analysis of freight transportation projects, because as our projects get more successful, VMT increases. And that's because it's linear with the amount of truck travel we do. So if we're moving more containers, we would expect VMT to increase. And it would be linear with growth in a multimodal context after you take out comparison for how much stuff moves by rail versus truck. Needless to say, for us, VMT is not a good evaluation of impacts. It needs to be put together with LOS. That doesn't happen here either. So we don't have a good appreciation from the way that this data is presented in the EIR of how that works. And why don't we know how VMT and levels of service integrate with one another? Because VMT isn't analyzed, because the EIR says that estimating changes in vehicle miles traveled and resulting emissions would be speculative, and therefore the analysis isn't being done. So again, we can't come back and ask for more mitigation. Even if you think the project's a good project, you can't come back and say, I really don't think that the proposal for the intersection of Adeline and 3rd is adequate based on how VMT and LOS work, because there was no analysis done, wasn't conducted. So as an industry, if in the past, you may recall having heard directly from the A's is, don't worry, we'll address your issues in the EIR. Pretty much our biggest issue, not addressed in the EIR.
But with respect to trucks, this EIR is deficient in both. It talks about what the impacts of the project are with respect to VMT for vehicles that are coming to the ballpark and vehicles that are coming to the housing and vehicles that are coming to the office as being proposed. But there's no analysis of the VMT for the trucks that are being displaced. Obviously, that's a huge impact. It creates a lot of additional traffic. And then the intensity of that traffic should be captured in an LOS evaluation. That's level of service. So you can look at an intersection and say, will this intersection still be functional, or will it be impacted by traffic congestion? There is no direct access to this site from land that does not require you to cross active railroad tracks. And they're not just active in terms of having a mainline presence, which obviously they are. They're also active because they provide access to the port and the UP rail yard in a switching capacity and a staging capacity. And as a train back, that there's an Amtrak presence there, Capital Corridor, and San Joaquin rail as well. And so the question about these impacts, again, goes both ways. You need to analyze what the impact of this project is on rail. And you also need to evaluate how the project will deal with rail in terms of the access to the site itself. And the EIR, unfortunately, doesn't do a good job of analyzing these things. And one of the real problems with the draft EIR with respect to rail doesn't propose as an alternative a fully grade separated site. Well, when you're fully grade separated, you have no direct interaction between cars, pedestrians, bicyclists, and trains. When you have a crossing at grade, you have full potential interaction between pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars with trains. And that's a problem. Obviously, if there's a major accident, it often and unfortunately involves loss of life, significant injury. They're horrific. They are inevitable. People from getting in the path of a train, it still happens. So the safest thing is to grade separate those activities. And this EIR doesn't do that. It doesn't propose a full grade separation alternative. That the A's find it infeasible because it might impact their ability to compete in Major League Baseball. You know, they don't even consider having a fully grade separated site, presumably because the time, energy, and money of doing a project right is inconvenient to the A's. And that's just a failing of an environmental impact report. The EIR should put forward a series of alternatives for policymakers, and they can look at them and they can make trade-offs about the cost and the time it takes to do a project versus the ultimate project. That decision hasn't even been put in front of the Oakland City Council, and that's one of the reasons why the EIR is deficient with respect to rail. It means it's failed, and it's failed to present policymakers, the public, and the project sponsor with the actual background that is needed to make full decisions. The city of Oakland isn't being asked just to approve the entitlements for a ballpark here. The city of Oakland is also going to be asked to put in public taxpayer funds to pay for the infrastructure to support the ballpark. That includes the potential for grade separations. If you assume that the city of Oakland has a higher duty and calling than a private business like the A's to protect the life and health and safety of its citizens, then they should be analyzing and looking at the costs and the trade-offs of infrastructure like a fully grade separated site. Yeah, it might be expensive, but if you haven't analyzed it, you don't know to say yes or no to that path. You don't know how to compare what type of mitigation measures are the best moving forward for this type of project. And frankly, it leaves out the core question that we've been pushing this whole time. Is this even a good place for the project? And that's a core question that they're trying to avoid. It's one of the reasons why some of the alternatives, including this alternative about grade separated sites, but also the evaluation of the Coliseum, are deficient in this document. They don't want people to see the obvious conclusion. And the obvious conclusion is from a time, energy, money, safety, environment perspective, the Coliseum is a much better site than Howard Terminal for this project. Yeah, I can't speak for the Coast Guard, but I have been in contact with pilots and other folks that are concerned with safe navigation of the vessels in the bay. We are looking at the question of how much interference there will be from this project on ship navigation. We're looking at whether or not the EIR really truly addresses the questions of safe navigation. We identified very early on for the city and the A's that our right to safe navigation is paramount. If people really want to have a ballpark and that does interfere with our ability to safely navigate, you don't have a port. So be that as it may, they couldn't ignore that topic. What we're looking at right now and what other folks in the on-water community are looking at is, are the protections and the mitigations that are associated with this and the baseline analysis, are those adequate to truly maintain our ability to freely and consistently navigate the site? The question about how are you going to police the area, what standards are you going to use, and how often are you going to have a patrol, and what's the commitment of the A's to fund that patrol? Does it last for the entirety of the life of this project? You know, we're talking about the potential for having 66-year leases at the site. Those questions are unanswered. Essentially, as you point out, you know, there's some signage requirements, but other than that, everything seems to be, the A's and the Oakland Police Department will get together and decide how many patrols they want to do, what they want to pay for, and what if the city of Oakland and the Oakland A's conveniently agree that they would like a less robust police force on the water because it costs less and it's less of a drain on the resources of an already stretched thin police department. There's not much we could do. So in the interest of specificity, in the interest of ensuring safety, and in the interest of making sure that there's true accountability and follow through and transparency in this, we need to really look closely at the draft EIR in the context of, is this really enforceable? Well, on fireworks, it's pretty interesting. Waterfronts across America and the world are a great and very popular place for fireworks displays of all kinds. And, you know, 4th of July, New Year's, you might be familiar with a lot of different waterscapes that include fireworks displays. And there are processes set up with the Coast Guard to do that. Most of them do not involve an active shipping channel. If there's any interference with the use of a channel, those types of interferences are minimized But when you're someplace like the San Francisco waterfront, you have options. You have a wide channel. You can direct traffic away from that area for a short amount of time. We don't have options in the Oakland estuary. It's a narrow channel. It provides essentially the only point of ingress and egress for the Oakland Inner Harbor, which is the largest terminal at the Port of Oakland and the one that handles the most volume and the most ships. And a buffer zone around a fireworks barge could potentially impact the ability to use the turning basin. It also has the potential for diverting other traffic, recreational traffic, kayakers and the like, into our traffic lane. So if you're focused on managing a buffer for recreational vessels, it's imperative that you don't push them into a main navigational channel for commercial vessels. The water obviously has a level of control that is different than what you might expect for, say, a road, or directing traffic away from a terrestrial fireworks display is relatively easy. You can park a couple of cop cars on one end of the street, and the other end, if you need to put up a temporary fence, you could do that. It takes a lot more work to do that on water. And the rules of the road for vessels are different than they are for cars. But there's a lot of other complications with fireworks too. And some of those have to do with, the potential for disrupting birds and other wildlife. How do you maintain our ability to use the navigational channel, which is right next to the terminal? The project is also complicated because you can't just meet the requirements of regular entitlement when you're on the bay. So when you're on trust lands, or when you're within the shoreline of the bay, or anywhere else in California within a coastal zone, you have additional restrictions, and those restrictions are there to make it hard to develop property because waterfront property is special. It's one of a kind. Once it's gone, you can't replace it. Once you make decisions about whether to fill the bay, they're hard to change. When you take the decision of transitioning property from a seaport into other uses, you will never have a seaport at that facility ever again. They are designed to be difficult. They are meant to create additional hoops. And the agencies that manage those hoops in the bay are BCDC for local decisions about whether or not something should be in a seaport prior to use. And from the state perspective, it's the State Lands Commission to determine whether or not it's consistent with the Tidelands Trust. Are you using it for something that's water dependent and public, in other words? We've all seen waterfronts transform over time from working industrial waterfronts to visitor serving waterfronts, or to parks, or the entirety of San Francisco is a story about the transformation from industrial working docks and military lands to a wonderful place to go out and walk and go to the Exploratorium, or go to Crissy Field, or go to Pier 39 and to attract tourists. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the process of doing that requires studious decisions about where do you want to put your industrial activities and what do you want to replace them with. It's not occurring here. There's no big discussion in the community writ large about what do we want the Oakland waterfront to look like? How do we want to transition to it? That's a decision that needs to be made regionally, because the benefits of the Port of Oakland accrue to the entirety of Northern California. That's a decision that needs to be made thoughtfully. And it's a decision that should be made in the context of all of the facts and the analysis of the impacts on the port. And that hasn't occurred. The EIR doesn't even do the cursory amount of analysis of what happens with the trucks that are being displaced from this site, much less what happens from a larger context with respect to the economy at large. So we're very concerned about that. And BCDC and State Lands Commission are places where those concerns need to be addressed if the city ignores them.
They want to take away our jobs. They want to transform this port into a playground. And we're here to let them know that it's going to take them walking over our dead bodies to give up this port.
This is about private corporate money. They said that they ain't gonna get no taxpayers' money because they want to own that. They want to take that from us. We not gonna have that. That's what we do. We ILWU. We fight.
Now you're talking about they're gonna create new jobs. Most of those jobs are non-union jobs. They're trying to take jobs that's been here before the AIDS. I'm an AIDS supporter. But you build that shit right over there in East Oakland, fulfill your promise that you told East Oakland you would do, and leave our fucking docks alone.
2011, I know that there are a lot of people here that remember this. A huge contingent of workers in the community marched over that bridge over there and shut this whole port down. The reason that those people, our brothers and sisters, gathered together and shut that port down, they didn't do that because they didn't like longshoremen. They didn't do that because they was mad at us. They did that because they was sending a message to this city and to our government about who this public land belongs to. This is not land for you to come and make all the jobs non-union and low-wage paying jobs. And just to say it like it is, that is exactly what building a stadium here is going to do. They're going to bring low-wage, non-union jobs here to replace union strong jobs. Now, the only thing we have as working people, the only weapon we have when we're fighting against our oppressors is our labor. Sometimes you got to have the courage. You got to have the grit. You got to have the fire to use that labor.
Thank you all for coming. I see a few of my union sisters out. Can you guys all come to the front? Everybody see us? And Brother Bruce, come on up here. Gennaro. This is our workforce. And I just wanted you to see the faces and look at the people. These are the people that the Fisher family is trying to unemploy. These are the people that work side by side with me every day. People, we waited 15 years to get this job. 15 years. And we all signed up in 1999. We are Class B members now, but it was a long time coming, and I'll tell you people, it was worth the wait. This is the best job. A black woman, a woman, period. I wouldn't care if you was green. This is the best job that you could get as a woman. Okay, in this community, and a lot more of us would live here if we could afford it. But we got millionaires coming into our community, stealing land, building stuff. Why would I want you to build another house or another condo that I can't afford? That she can't afford, that you can't afford. We cannot afford to even live here. Look at the homeless population. We already fighting that. And you want to build something else that they can't have either? No, thank you. Tell the Fisher family, pack it up, settle with the wealth they have, and let the people of Oakland have their land. Thank you all.
Mr. Fisher, if you think that you can come into Oakland and steal our property, pull a hood over our heads, and tell us to stand by and leave you alone, you got another thing coming there, homie. He's so interested in Oakland that he doesn't have not even one of his properties in Oakland. There's not a Gap, there's not an Old Navy, but Banana Republic, his signature store. Not a single store is in Oakland, and he's so concerned about Oakland that he don't have none of his properties here. That's no concern. His concern is making all that money by stealing the land out here in East Oakland and stealing land over there in West Oakland. If you want to do something, Mr. Fisher, take your money and make it work in the city of Oakland. Invest in us, because you want us to invest in you. Okay? Make us part of your property. Support us so we can support you. We love the A's. We love them right where they're at. Right where they're at. I love that stadium. I've caught many foul balls over there. Okay? But when you talk about moving downtown and interrupting my work, now me and you gotta talk, okay? And it's not gonna be nice because I love my job and I love what it represents. And I'm not gonna give it up easily. And Oakland is not for sale by any means. We do not give in to the billionaire's dream of owning all of Oakland, especially the waterfront.
I have pride in Oakland. Can you say pride? Can you say pride? I have pride living in Oakland, but I'm not proud of our politicians. Our politicians are being bought by billionaires, 70% homelessness. They drive up to their big houses in the hills, right past Tent City. They try to destroy our ILWU union, predominantly black union, some of the greatest paying jobs in California and in the United States. Are we gonna stand for that? What are we gonna do? Do you have pride? Vote. Are you proud of your elected officials? Then vote their asses out. God bless America. Thank you.
Because every time you have a situation that's not economically viable for the citizens in whatever town or city or county or state that you're talking about, it always disproportionately affects negatively members of that community that are black and brown, that are minority. This is a repetitive thing that we see happening over and over and over and over again. To my ILWU brothers and sisters, I was raised what they call a longshore baby. My father, fortunately, got the opportunity to be a longshoreman. I'm a third generation longshoreman. That port, the Port of Oakland, built lives for families like mine and families of those brothers and sisters who built the ILWU. The ILWU Local 10 right now is roughly 76% black. Okay? This is the only place in the country, one of the only places in the country where you have an opportunity like that for black and brown citizens, to where if you are a black member of the ILWU Local 10, you earn the same as a white member. Okay? If you are a woman member of the ILWU Local 10, you earn the same as a man. Okay? If you are a black woman, you earn the same as a white woman. Okay? If you're a transgender woman, you earn the same as anybody else on the waterfront. There is no differences. There's no discrimination. This town right here, Oakland, California, has a lot to do with the ability of the ILWU to build over the years, because this is a union town. We need to keep this a union town. The biggest threat to a union town is a greedy billionaire. A billionaire that not only wants this land across the street here to build condos on and profitize off of, but also the public land on the waterfront where we work. An area that provides good union paying jobs for minorities in our city. What kind of jobs is a ballpark going to offer? They're going to offer low wage, minimum wage paying jobs. So the people who at the stadium won't even be able to afford to go to the game on their day off. Will the people that work at the proposed Oakland A's Stadium downtown, will they be able to afford property in Oakland? They'll be getting off work, traveling to somewhere far where they live, where they can afford to live. That is not economically viable for this city. It's not economically viable for our citizens, and it damn sure is not economically viable for all of those people you see living in tents under the bridge, under freeways, on the side of the road. It is not economically viable for this area. It's not economically viable for the ILWU, and we are not going to stand by and let them do this criminal act to this community. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
When I say union, you say fight. Union. Fight. Union. Fight. When I say people, you say fight. People. Fight. People. Fight. When I say local, you say 10. Local. 10. Local. 10. Local. 10. 10. 10.
Let's get ready to march, brothers and sisters.